Welcome to the Catholic Sphere. Each week we have a different host and a different focus as we tackle topics important to Catholics around the globe. I'm your host this week, Father Joseph Mary. Today our theme is faith, family, and farming. We have three guests who will be speaking about their own decision to raise their families on a farm. John Cuddeback is a philosophy professor and founder of Lifecraft, which helps to empower people to live a truly human life, especially in their homes. Leah Darrow recently produced a three-part video series entitled The Cultivation of Purpose, Faith, Farming, and Vocation. And Jason Craig is the founder of St. Joseph's Farm and Fraternus, which are helping to raise up strong Catholic men. John, let's start with you. Tell us a little about your background, Lifecraft, and why you are raising your family on a farm.
Well, thanks, Father. So many things come together in interesting ways in life. I had some background in kind of raising animals and gardening, or something been passed on to me by my father. Interestingly, my wife, Sophia, didn't have any experience in this area at all. So it was kind of a big thing. Are we gonna pull this lever or not? So it was a little bit challenging. I didn't want to push too hard, but I had a deep conviction that this was going to be a way in these very challenging times to try to give our children the kind of context and home that I knew both Sophie and I really wanted to have for our children. So I was kind of the moving force there, saying, "Dear, I really think taking the opportunity that we were given by my generous parents to take a little piece of land from them to be able to start a kind of homestead there." I said, "I really think this is the opportunity that God is giving us." And looking back, that was 28 years ago. God has really blessed us, and it's made a big difference in our life. It's combined very nicely with my being a professor of philosophy at nearby Christendom College, and so people call me the philosophy farmer, or the farmer philosopher, and it goes together well. It really does. And Lifecraft is just kind of an online way to bring some of that teaching that I do in the classroom to a broader audience.
What would you say would be one of the big positives of living on the farm?
I think, Father, gosh, there's so much. I'm so convinced that God wants to teach us so many things through the book of nature. And it's a book that in so many ways in our age we've left closed. And so to kind of take that opportunity to reopen that book and look again, it's a way of contacting one of those kind of basic lessons about life that God intended at least many of us to be able to live by being close to the land. And I suppose if I just chose one, to trust his providence. If there's one thing that kind of comes through, it's that God's always caring for us. God always has a plan that's better than our plan, and sometimes we don't quite understand it. But if we have the humility and the courage and the work ethic to follow it, to discover it, it's going to make all the difference, and it's really going to pay off for us.
Leah, you were born and raised on a farm and then became a fashion model. Did you ever imagine that you would be back on a farm raising your children? Tell us about your journey and the ultimate decision for you and your husband to move to a farm.
Yeah, it seems pretty extreme when you think about where I've started, what I did in the middle part of my life, and then where I'm at now. In my days as a fashion model in New York and on the TV show America's Next Top Model, this was not on the radar whatsoever to go back to that farm living that I was raised with in Oklahoma. But God is really good and really patient, and so I married Ricky in 2012, and we've had 6 kids back to back. We had 6 kids in about 7.5 years. And there was a point, believe it or not, where we sat and had a few moments of thoughts to ourselves, where we asked ourselves those hard questions of, what is the best environment for us to raise saints? Like, what would be, if we could choose anything, what do we think would be the best physical environment, even mental, spiritual, like what do you think we could do? And as we talked about that, it was actually Ricky, my husband, who said, when you talk about your childhood, when you talk about growing up on the farm, you always mention God. And I said, oh my gosh, you're right. And because I would always talk about, I was out in the fields, and I would pray, and then I would play. And he goes, do you think there's something there? And I mean, it was kind of obvious of like, yeah. So we began to make this big dream and this big plan happen. And we started just to reverse engineer, like, how could we, because we were living in the city at the time, living in St. Louis, in suburbia, and it was a great life, a good life. And, as much as we were trying to do a very holy life, it was centered on God and centered on faith and centered on our church community. But we really did feel like God was calling us into someplace special, someplace a little bit more quiet for us to focus on what really mattered. And we really did want to raise saints. And that's, I know, all of our callings as parents, it's what we want to do. And we just decided to figure out, like, what would be a way that we could do that. And this is where God was calling us. So through a lot of work, we made the plunge. God opened up opportunities for us, and we found an 80-acre farm in southern Missouri. And we said, okay, let's go. Let's leave the city. Let's leave everything that we know, and let's decide to farm this land and raise our kids here. And so that's what we're currently doing.
So it's been a good decision, moving out to the farm and taking this leap of faith?
Oh, yeah, it's life-changing. It's life-changing. I don't regret a single moment, a single second, nothing. I do not regret it. It's been the hardest thing we've done. It's been the most beautiful thing we've done, to watch my kids run around and play, to watch them become very interdependent upon one another and nature, and to see things and to learn things that I could not teach them in a book. I could not teach them in homeschool outside of what nature can give them. And the opportunity for them to experience God outside with everything around them is something, there's no way that I could have done that on my own. That's just purely, divinely inspired.
Jason, tell us about your roots and why you decided to start homesteading, and what is St. Joseph's Farm?
Yeah, I did not grow up farming. Like most Americans, though, I can go back one or two generations, and when most, in the 1800s, 90% of people were farming. Most of us aren't far from it, but by experience, I did not have it. I grew up in a rural area, but kind of on the cusp of suburbia and some city life and country life all mixed up. But I was working with the apostle I still work with, which is fraternists, and the main goal of that is to sort of stop the hemorrhaging of our young men away from the church, but also to form men of virtue. And I was studying for a master's degree and sort of studying this topic. How did this happen? Or in other words, why do we even need fraternists? Why is this so difficult right now? And asking pretty hard questions and looking at it from a historical and philosophical and theological perspective, what's going on? And I became convinced, I'm still convinced, that we as a society really haven't recovered from industrialization. When it comes to the coherence of the family and the formation of men, we really haven't recovered how are we going to continue to form good, virtuous men. Pope Pius XII said, our modern industrialized society and the farm produce altogether different men. And we can, with great effort, continue to form good men in the modern setting. I'm not at all despairing of the work of grace and the effort of good people, but it's clear, I think, that we can observe what Pius XII observed, that it's producing altogether different men. And I wanted the kind of men that it seemed to me were produced on work. And I don't mean just on the land. I mean in working alongside their father, which was my primary concern, was to find a way where we could be close to each other. And I think a lot of men, that's one of their primary reasons they want to homestead. Whether or not we're using the word farming and homesteading interchangeably here, but typically we think of farming as a job almost, because it very often is a very serious occupation. And then homesteading would be where we are trying to supply through our own labor, some of the needs of the household, that's where we are. I think those of us on this panel are, and that's primarily what we are doing. And I wanted to do that with my sons and with my daughters now. We only had one daughter then, now we have three, but we have 5 sons. And it was a situation a lot like what Leah described, of us sitting there. I'm holding my second son at the time, and my wife just said, well, where do we need to be? And I'm studying these things, and I couldn't help but come to the conclusion, we need to be on a farm. And knowing that particular kid now, Peter George, is the name, which it means rock in farmer. It's the meaning of his name. It's good that he's here. I'll put it that way. And it's been very difficult. We did not, we weren't able to sort of afford a farm right away. We had very little resources and money, and we had to barter labor to work and to live on a farm back in our home state of North Carolina. And we've just been slowly building up since then. And now we operate a small dairy farm, among many other things, mostly pigs and children.
John, why do you think that connecting with nature is so important? You have in one of your videos, you talk about our pervasive culture values connectedness over presence, image over reality, success over character. Talk about that.
Well, Father, it's, one line that I really like from an early agrarian writer is that we have had the ordinary functions of human life removed from us. The very simple, rich things that God intended to be at the heart of human life. Things like, picture being together on the porch, working together it doesn't have to be in a field, but working together in a field is a great kind of archetype of that. Sitting around the fire, telling stories. These very, very simple things that bring us together and tend to be in natural contexts. These are so central to human life, and I like Jason there bringing up industrialization. I completely agree. We haven't recovered from the change in habits, the change in customs, the simple things. Though what this author Andrew Lytle was saying, the ordinary functions of human living have been taken away from us, largely through technology and the association patterns of living. So for us to be taking steps they're kind of simple steps, but they're still hard steps to get back those things. I think this is very Christian, with that sense of grace perfects nature. And we need to look to the healing of nature. And there I mean human nature and connection with the natural world. This is part of God's plan. And so to look at renewing things around us in our own life and in the broader society, to focus in the home, to focus on the ordinary, to focus on reconnecting in basic ways. These are to prioritize things that the common practices today have completely missed.
Leah, tell us about your thoughts on the importance of connecting to nature with your pumpkin patch and the other crops you grow. Isn't technology enough?
Well, yeah, that's, we have gotten along for a very long time without technology. That's not to say that it's not helpful and good, and we're clearly using it right now, hopefully for God's glory. However, is it required for us to live the life we're called to live? And I think the answer is no, it's not. So how can we access that space in our life where we can let parts of that technology go and for us to connect with our natural world, connect with people and relationships? And I tell you something, it's really easy for me now to have these conversations and relationships, even with my kids and my husband, as we're walking the fields, as we're planting our elderberries or the pumpkin patch, or we're taking care of the cattle or the pigs or the chickens, because everything's just a little bit more simple and there's less distraction. And also, nature teaches you so much. Like, my kids know, like, when we put those little elderberry sticks into the ground and we're putting it down and we're patting it down, that there's a certain way that something has to be planted for it to grow right. And there's certain conditions that need to happen. And when they go back the next week and they see the little, the little leaves popping off of this elderberry stick, or they see the pumpkin start to grow, they see actual progress and growth. And so we have so few opportunities where we are actually looking at progress and growth in the things that we are doing in the world and in the natural state. And so a lot of times, so much progress and growth, we only want to focus about ourselves. And for me, as a coach, as somebody who I help coach people in personal growth, it's a good thing. but there's also so much other growth in our life, spiritual growth, and literally growth in the land that can teach us so much more. And I think that's where God connected us so clearly. I mean, we all started here in this garden, right? So there's a lot there to learn about what nature really is there for, to connect and to be a part of that. You know, this divine energy of God is so clearly apparent in nature, especially when you're talking about everything around us in those simplest forms. So I don't want to take too much more of your time. I could go on this so much, but this is something we all know is true. We all know that when we step out into a place where we have a little bit extra space, when we have less distraction, when we have less technology, we feel a weight come off of our shoulders. We feel like we can breathe a little bit better. We even talk about how, the air is better out in the country versus in the city. So there's just something a little bit simpler in those spaces. It's just taking the time to access them.
Jason, talk about connecting with nature also, and I think what Leah is referring to there as well is the pervasiveness of silence, right, that enables you to be able to communicate with others as well, and your children.
I think I mentioned I have 8 children, so I don't know how much I know about silence these days, or at least one sort of noise that we have. The when you're using the word connection a lot, which is good, I think, and I think all of us are trying to be delicate about not saying, well, just technology versus nature. I mean, I think one helpful way to think what we're doing is that a tool is an extension of our strength and our creativity as man. So the tools are good. I heard someone put it this way, that but sometimes a machine replaces us. I think that's what John was putting, that he's trying to recover things that we've replaced. And on our farm, the connection is that we are recovering a shared work together. So what we've noticed, if we look at the spectrum of between a suburban home and the homestead, not to be condemning of the suburban home, but the suburban home is primarily a place of consumption where we all live together. There's a form of income that comes in from one or two parents usually, and then the family makes a decision on how to spend the time, spend that money and time. So it's essentially a consuming unit. That's what they're doing. And the difference in a homestead is that you become a producing unit. You are making something. So that's sort of the essential thing that you're doing. And as far as connection, what we've noticed, because we're still, we're within driving distance of different things. We could do soccer or jujitsu and these things, that when you engage in the world that is primarily run by consumption and products, one, you have to purchase something, and two, those things seem like a centrifugal force. They pull the family outward. The more and they're good things, so it's not as if they're bad things. That's what makes it so difficult, is that our lives sometimes feel like they're falling apart while we're doing good things. Like, how can this be bad if it's good? And that's a whole nother question of how to balance those sort of things. We have chosen, we're using the word simpler life. In some ways it's simpler, but it's very hard and grueling and constant. If the pigs are running down the road, there's no, oh, this is so simple. How to get them back in, and who left the gate open, and but the work of it, instead of the centrifugal force sort of pulling you outward where you feel like you have to balance, it just pulls everyone back in, so that when, even as problems arise, sometimes it can pull your family back in. I'm using an actual example. We had a pig for whom she just didn't think that any fences, electric or physical, mattered to her, and she would, she became an escape artist. So yesterday was her last day on the farm, and it was a bit of a crisis. But as the family, we came together and we had to do a sort of emergency pig hog killing and processing, and that's a lot of, anyone who's done it, that's a lot of work, and we hadn't expected to do that, but all of a sudden the whole family was working together. So even in the midst of a crisis, we're all doing it, and at the end of the day, the family was closer. So we sort of started with something difficult, but the homestead draws us in together very frequently. Whereas I just noticed the more we engage in, I guess, what the world offers, it pulls us outward. So the question is, technology or this it's somewhat related, but that word connectivity, it helps us absolutely. It's not the simpler life of it is not an easier life. in some ways much more difficult, but in ways that bring us connection.
Well, let's talk about many of our viewers, of course, live in the city, the heart of the city. They could say, this would be an impossible thing for me to do, to accomplish. What advice would you give them, John?
I'd give them two kinds of advice. One is, you might be right. It might not be reasonable to do it in the way that the people that are talking right here and are very blessed to be able to be experiencing this. A number of others simply aren't going to be able to do this, and that's fine. And I think the reason for that is, at the end of the day, it's about deeper principles. The most important principles here are, as Leah referred to, becoming a saint, having that richer human life and then supernatural life. At the end of the day, these homesteading practices are about that. And they're not, at least in the agricultural ways here, are not the only way of doing that. And once I heard Wendell Berry was speaking, and he said, one of the things that I consistently say to people is, don't necessarily just go and buy a farm because you've read the things that I'm writing here. It really takes discernment about where to try to live a richer kind of life. So to people living in the suburbs, I'd say, if the suburbs are where you're going to be, recognize that at the end of the day, all the things that are making Leah and Jason and I so excited here are not simply the living close to nature, but it's what that empowers us to do as a family. And you can do that too in other contexts. Jason's talking about good work. There's other kinds of good work. Agricultural good work is a great example, and I think one in God's providence that is particularly fitting today. So it's worth thinking about, to what extent can we try to do that. But there's other kinds of work. There's doing carpentry together. There's doing other kinds of home crafting things, working on fixing cars together. Work brings people together. So the kind of principles that are being enacted here can be applied in other places. So I'd encourage them, go to the more root principles. Think about what you need to make your household more the household that you want it to be. And then if it isn't going to work, to go and kind of do the homesteading thing. Still, second piece of advice, look at how you can, in smaller ways, do that in your current context. And I love to say, you can garden anywhere, even if it's just that, the pots on the patio. Right. This is a way of getting in touch with the earth. You can be getting to know bird species. You can be getting to know tree species. You can be getting out and interacting with the natural world, even there in suburbs, even in the city too. And so trying to, at least in some ways, interact in a more meaningful way, especially through good work when possible, being creative and finding that in non-rural situations. But always bear in mind the most important things is the relationships and the deeper kind of rich human ordinary activities that can be, in some sense, done anywhere.
Leah, what is your advice for those who live in a city that could never see their way to doing what you're doing?
Well, I would be very careful to use the word impossible or impractical. I just don't think that's appropriate. I really don't. I would challenge anybody who would say that, like, oh, it's impossible. Well, it hasn't been for quite a few thousand years that people have been living like this. It's not impossible, and it might not even be impractical. However, as John was saying, discernment is so important. Yes, you might discern that's not where God's calling you, and that might not be the spot for you and your family or where you're at. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible. It just might not be where God's calling you. However, God is definitely calling you to be closer to him. And so I would begin to ask the questions. How are you living your life in a way that limits distraction so that you can have a closer ear to the Lord, so that you can create more silence? Is there something in your life that you could let go of so that you live, in a sense, a more simpler life that we've been talking about? Because wherever you are, if you're in the suburb, if you're in the city, if you're in the country, wherever, God is still calling you to him. And so we've all been talking about a very, this way in which where we live and what we do where we live has helped us connect deeper with God and our path to Christ. And so that is for everybody. regardless of how much, acreage you live on or whatever corner of the planet you're where you're at. So where are you living? Because that's not impractical. It's not impractical to get closer to the Lord, to create more silence, to create more space, to limit the distractions, and see what's in your life that really is taking away time with connection to your family, to your kids, to your spouse, to the people who God is calling you to be with and to serve. Start there and then just let it grow. And don't be afraid to dream big. Don't be afraid to dream big, and don't be afraid of the time it takes for God to help you fulfill those dreams.
Awesome. Well, Jason, we just have 2 minutes left, but I know you have these weekends where maybe those who live in the city can come out and experience some of the things that we've been talking about. Talk about St. Joseph's Farm and the weekends.
Sure. It started with kind of an outgrowth of Fraternus. We just started doing weekends for fathers and sons. You talked about connection. Sometimes dads, they just want to have a weekend with their son. And we have found that the life here is something we can share. It's basically a weekend that revolves around preparing, killing, cooking a pig and enjoying it on at the end of it. And that's kind of, people have joked that we're a one-trick pony here. That might be true. The homestead weekends have been a lot of what John and Leah were just saying, which is the discernment of homesteading and how we can actually get there. We're not proposing for those that are not disposed or they're uncaring about this as an option. Then we can simply move on. If you're not interested, that's fine. But there are, I'd say, huge numbers of people that do want to discern how to do it. And sometimes it can seem insurmountable and impossible. And sometimes they get, that slur of it being impractical, which is the most ridiculous thing. There's nothing more practical in the world than the fact that food can come out of dirt and you can do it. I don't even understand that anymore. But for those who want to make that change, it can be very difficult because it's not just another lifestyle choice. It's just this endless, modern liberalism of what I just want to choose and formulate and craft this life. It is something that goes back to some foundational principles of how we're living, and that's hard actually when you haven't been living that particular, potentially for generations.
Mm-hmm.
And then practically, how will we make it work? What about retirement? What about a job? And can I farm full time? Can I make a living from the land?
Well, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time here, but thank you, Jason and Leah and John, for being part of this, and we look forward to a future episode to continue talking about these different issues. And may Almighty God bless all of you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week here on the Catholic Sphere with host Debbie Cowden.